Whoa, hey everybody on the Hangouts, which is nobody. I'm
There should be at least one person.
Yeah, which is you. Well, do you see it?
It just popped up right now. So
That's sweet. All right, well,
And you didn't broadcast the URL.
30 seconds maybe.
I'm gonna share my entire screen. It's gonna be great. Actually, I'm gonna just share this. Okay, hey everybody. Welcome to the February edition of the Awesome Drupal User Group. Today we're going to be talking about something called Aquifer, which is a cool project that I like a lot, and so I'm excited to present it to you. You are the first people to ever see this presentation or hear about this product.
Yay!
So besides me, which I don't count. So anyway, I'm going to go through and show you a couple things about this tool and why it's useful, and we'll go from there. I'm Patrick Coffey. I'm an engineer at 4 Kitchens. Enough about that. So how do we go about building Drupal websites, right? What do we do? Well, we typically start by grabbing a copy of Drupal, Drush DL Drupal, or like Drupal.org, and we get the zip file or whatever we do. And then we commit it to a repository, and we'll end up with something like this, right? Something just like that. We got a Drupal site root. Sometimes we might actually fork the Drupal Git code base so that we have the Git history. If you work with Pantheon, they'll do that. But in a lot of cases, we just go ahead and grab a copy and throw it in a repo. So then from there, we install a bunch of contrib modules, get views going, ctools, all that jazz. And we create custom modules and themes to help us make our site exactly how we want it. And we take all of our content types and configurations, we put them in features and commit those into our code base as well. We add patches to our contrib modules that don't work. And we might even patch core, especially if we use a distro, might patch the distro. And then we'll add JavaScript libraries, put those in the sites all libraries directory. And then we'll build our awesome site, push it all into a repo, throw it on a server and run it, right? That's how we typically build a Drupal website. This setup works really well. We create a lot of Drupal websites like that, millions and millions of websites, and it's been a pretty solid way to approach creating these sites and applications. But there are some actual pain points to this process. So updating core dependencies can be really challenging. If you've applied patches to a module or to core itself, and you want to update core or that module, you have to reapply the patch. But if the patch is incorrect, you'll have to recreate the patch and re-roll it, and it gets to be a big mess. The code base becomes out of sync with the database, right? So you'll have features, and those features will describe some complete set of configuration in your project. But what if you change something in the database? And it gets out of track, or you don't actually featureize something? Well, you don't really know, and that might cause some really strange problems later on. Code review becomes really difficult. So if you're accustomed to working with a team and you have a review process for all the code that comes into your project, let's say somebody adds a custom module. They're just like, hey, I'm going to create this view. We don't have the views module installed yet, so here in my commit, I'm going to add a view module. And then you got this like 6,000 lines of code, and it's impossible to see what code they actually wrote or what features and stuff they actually added. And it just gets kind of munged into the contrib code that's being added to your project as though it's being introduced for the first time and it isn't an actual dependency. And it's hard to tell what is custom code and what is not in these PRs, and Git history becomes really actually kind of useless because you're like, oh, hey, I want to find out when this regression was introduced or when this piece of code got merged into the project, and you got to dig through all of this contrib code that has a completely separate Git history that you didn't import just to find one thing. And then the longer your project lives, the more you add to it, the more patches and the more updates you have to apply, the more giant these collections of problems become. And so like we actually need to solve these problems. These issues exist because we actually manually create, modify, and maintain entire builds. We get a Drupal site root, we modify it, and then we execute it, right? And PHP is an interpreted language. It's not compiled, so it's not like we're running a bunch of like weird stuff. It's like a C project where you have to actually compile it to machine code. But we're still effectively, modifying a compiled version of a project. And if we change our approach to how we build Drupal sites, we can introduce a build system that can automate a lot of these things that we're talking about. Because we take all these different procedures and we put them into a repeatable executable pattern, which is essentially what a build system is. So what is a build system, right? A build system is a tool that's designed to automate specific portions of a development process, specifically compiling a program, right? Which is kind of a weird thing to say for a PHP project, but compiling includes taking all the dependencies, grabbing them, constructing an actual executable piece of software, and that's what a build system will do. It'll take all of your code, all of your dependencies, all the things that you want to bunch together in one executable, and it creates that. These tools have been used for a lot of years. But I think the earliest one, which is like Make, was introduced in like the 80s or something. I don't know. They've been around for a long time. So these people got really frustrated and they were like, I'm not even going to deal with this. Let's write something to deal with it so we don't have to do it, right? And again, it's not as painful as not having a build system for C or something like that, because compiling a language is different than compiling all the things you need for a project. But there are still some really things you just don't want to do involved with like creating an executable PHP project. So build systems, they help developers track dependencies, track versions, encapsulate configuration and apply the configuration to the thing that's going to be executed, and then store other states and centralize all of that. And usually build systems contain tools that simplify the process of running automated testing, whether that be unit testing or functional testing, linting your code base, running code smell detectors, and a lot of other things that you just sort of randomly need to do. There's a lot of those random tasks. So in the Drupal world, we've got a couple of these build system type things. We have some boilerplates. It's like, okay, hey, clone this and run this script and you can do this and you'll have a Drupal site. And then we have shell scripts sometimes that we can just put in a project that's called, we'll just call the shell script rebuild or something, and it'll go and revert features or run updb and do a couple other things. But these tool sets are really hard to maintain. But when you have a boilerplate that represents an actual functional tool set, it doesn't work really well, especially as you start to promote that on a lot of different projects, and you've got a lot of different versions of this boilerplate, and then you want to update it. How do you do that? Well, you have to pull in the updates and apply them manually instead of using something like a versioning system, and it just becomes really laborious. And then you'll have people that modify it to make it work for their specific needs, because why make it configurable? You're just applying it to a project. And when they want to get the updates, then they've already made changes to it, and you can't merge it, and it gets to be a big mess, and it's unmaintainable, and it's like a giant yarn of stuff eventually that you just don't want to deal with. They're not portable, they're not extendable, and they're not easily manageable. And they have a lot of like cross-platform compatibility issues. There are a lot of differences between like Linux and OS X, especially Windows. And when you have these tool sets, people that use these different operating systems will encounter a lot of different edge cases. And again, they'll fix it for one, and then that won't get promoted to others, and so you have to fix the same problem like 20 times on 20 different projects, and it gets really annoying. So these are not adequate for, they're not a good final solution. It's great progress, but we need to encapsulate that in something that's a little bit more modular and extendable and usable and just pleasant to work with. So the web chefs have 4 kitchens. We actually built some of these shell script things and boilerplates, and we were like, no, we don't want to do this anymore. This is not cool. It causes a lot of challenges. And so we sort of like took all the lessons that we learned while building those mechanisms and abstracted them into a new tool that we call Aquifer. Aquifer has been leveraged on several large-scale projects and is really actually proven to be an extremely valuable tool and a valuable addition to our standard set of tools that we use. So let's go ahead and take a look at what Aquifer is. So Aquifer is a command line interface that simplifies the process of scaffolding, building, testing, and deploying Drupal websites. As you can see, run the Aquifer command after you install it, and you get this documentation. Cool. Aquifer also ships with an extension system that makes it really easy to add additional tools to a project. So Aquifer, in and of itself, just contains the lowest common denominator set of tools that every project needs in a build system. And if you want to add more tools, then you should be able to do that without modifying Aquifer's core, and you should be able to do it easily. And so there's an extension system that allows you to define separate mechanisms that change Aquifer's behavior, but without modifying Aquifer itself, and on a project-by-project basis. And so that's a really key component and a key architectural piece of how Aquifer works. Aquifer is easy to install. It's just an npm module, so you just need to make sure you have the latest stable version of Node, because why not? We highly recommend using NVM Node Version Manager. If you've got it installed in some other way, sudo rm-rf it and get it out, because NVM makes it a lot easier to use different Node versions. You'll also want to make that Drush is installed at a late version. 7.1.0 is officially supported by Aquifer. I think 8 also works, although 8 has some really interesting actual console level issues that haven't been resolved yet. So we're still working with that. And then once you have those two things done, just run npm install -g Aquifer. That -g flag is basically telling npm to install it globally on your system as a system level dependency. So it becomes a command that's available just with the Aquifer keyword. And when you run that, you'll get this. It's nice little CLI help. So the first thing that we want to do with Aquifer, right, is just to create a Drupal project. Using this new sort of system that we're going to implement for building Drupal sites without modifying it as a build target, right? So Aquifer ships with a tool that lets you easily create Drupal projects that are using a Drush make workflow. If you're not familiar with Drush make just allows you to define all the dependencies of a given site and the explicit version of those dependencies, like modules, themes, libraries, patches, and core and distributions, and it'll just execute and create a Drupal site root that contains all of those dependencies. And so it'll use that tool and build a workflow around that. And you just have to use the Aquifer create command and pass it an argument, which is whatever you want it to be, the name of the project that you're actually working on. It will create that folder and scaffold out a sensible source tree for what you're trying to do. So if you look in the folder that it creates when you run that command, you're going to see a number of things. You're going to see an Aquifer JSON file, a build folder, a Drupal.make.yaml file, Drush, files, modules, roots, settings, themes, .aquifer, and editor config, and get ignore. These are all standard things that an Aquifer project will contain, and it's not too complicated. It's a lot shorter than that giant list we had before, so that's cool. And a little bit more detail about what those files are. The Aquifer.json file contains information about the project that you're actually working in currently. So when you change your terminal directory into the Aquifer project, Aquifer will initialize a project, and it understands where all the assets of that project are and what it can do with them and what those assets are. And Aquifer JSON describes all of that to Aquifer as a command line interface. The Drupal.make.yaml file is the file in which you describe all of your dependencies, your core versions, all that stuff that I was telling you about Drush make. All of that belongs in that YAML file, and I'll show you a little bit of it later. The Drush directory contains just Drush stuff, like Drush plugins and RC files, like registry rebuild or whatever, and it's just a place to put those things. The files directory, which is symlinked from sites all files. Oh, I'm sorry, sites default files. It's actually incorrect in here, so I need to change that. It symlinks from that directory into your root directory, so you don't have to go and find it in the build. You can just get to it right from the root of your project. It's not committed, so you should be good to go there. The /modules, /theme, and /root directories, they all contain custom codes like custom modules, custom themes, features, and then root files like htaccess or robots.txt, which you'll want to modify because you want to customize them and make them behave exactly how you want them for any given project. And then finally, the settings directory, which contains settings files like settings.php. And those will be synced up, and they'll allow you to configure your project to connect to a database and do all that nice stuff.
So you're just linking all the stuff for convenience to have it in Drupal.
So when it yeah. So I'll take a closer look at the build system in a minute, but it takes all of these custom assets that you need to check into a repository because they're assets that you need to keep track of in your custom code, and it'll symlink them into a build destination or copy them. You can tell it to do either one when you're actually creating an executable Drupal project. Speaking of that, Aquifer has a build command that does just what I described. Once you've created a project and you can actually run an Aquifer build command, the Aquifer build command takes a few arguments, -c, which will copy directories instead of symlinking them. By default, they will symlink the directories. And then a -d, which allows you to specify a full path. It defaults to whatever path you've set in Aquifer.json, which by default is just the build directory that I showed you earlier. But if you wanted to throw it on your desktop, or if you're running this on a production server and you want to set it in var www/Drupal or whatever, you would do that with that flag. And in production, you would say a -c for copy. So it'll execute Drush make against your Drupal.make.yaml file, and then it'll symlink all of your stuff into their correct places. And that's about all that command does. Through a lot of effort, and a lot of time, and a lot of testing, it actually works. It will symlink relative paths. It's pretty foolproof at this point, so you can basically tell it to put that build anywhere you want, and it'll work. Yes, that was hard to get to work on HFS+. So we've built an Aquifer project. We've created one. We've built a Drupal site root from it. Well, what's the first thing we want to do, right? After we've downloaded custom or contrib modules, we want to add custom code. We want to add features. We want to add modules that do things that we want them to do, and themes that style our site. So those things go into the folders that I showed you earlier, and you actually do check them into your repository. Those are things that you actually do need to keep track of. If you wanted to, you could maintain modules in separate repositories and then pull them in with the Drupal make file. So if you wanted to separate all your custom code into different Git repositories and use them on multiple projects or something like that, that's an easy process as well. But if you're just writing stuff for your project, you just put it in these folders and you check them in. And like I said, the root should include files that overwrite root files. Even index.php if you want to do that. You shouldn't. So all the directories containing custom code will be synced or copied to your build destination when you use Aquifer's build tool. Already covered that, but it's just good to know that it will actually sync or copy them. And there are a couple weird, they're not weird, they're just sort of like gotchas there, because if you're trying to sync a directory to a directory that already exists, it's not going to overwrite it, it's just going to ignore it and not overwrite it. So except for in the case of root files, because we actually do need to remove those and overwrite them. So adding contrib code, right? We want to modify the YAML file, Drupal.make.yaml. And with this, we can add contrib modules, themes, libraries, patches, and we can update the versions of all of those dependencies really easily just by defining those things in this file. If you want to dig more into Drupal.make, Drush make, yes, Drush make, I'm sorry. You can do that. It's got really extensive documentation, and that's all available with a quick Google search. But this is an easy way to just define all of your external dependencies, including Drupal core. So you install dependencies in Drupal, you go and you download it, but in Drupal that's not good enough. You have to actually enable it. And so Aquifer uses the master module to track all of the top level dependencies of your project. So you should be able to take a clean Drupal database from a fresh install, and execute the master module, and then have all of your stuff enabled. And Aquifer actually uses the master module to perform those actions. So if you go to the settings.php file, you'll see where it actually configures the master module to turn certain things on, and then the master module turns everything that isn't in that list off. By default, Aquifer ships with 3 environments. I think it's live, test, and local. And depending on those different environments, you might want to enable different things like Aquifer cache purge. Probably don't want to enable that locally. It might cause some problems, but you do want to enable it on live. So you put that in the live section, and the master module will take care of that. Aquifer also has a refresh command. Like I was saying about grabbing dependencies and enabling them, you should also have all of the configuration needed to make your project work correctly. All of that should be stored in code. And so the refresh command executes a number of different commands that help you make sure that your code base is reverted against the state of your database is reverted against the state of your code base. So at any given time, if you needed to just build a new version of the site without content, you can do it. No big deal. That saves a lot of time in the future because it mitigates a lot of regressions, and it saves you from having to solve a lot of very strange and elusive bugs that end up being really frustrating. So the Aquifer refresh command runs, it rebuilds the registry, updates all the modules. It runs the update hooks for the modules, installs the master module, executes the master module, which enables all the top-level dependencies, runs all updates, and then reverts all installed features and clears the cache. So that will basically effectively take your database and make it obey the code base and revert it against the configuration that you've set in your project, and keep the database from veering off into some other thing. So, if you define something in a code base and then you revert features, it won't be there anymore if it's not in the feature. So it kind of keeps the code base and the database tightly paired together so you know exactly what your project is and what it's doing. The Aquifer refresh command is easy to use. You just run Aquifer refresh -a. If you want to pass an alias, you can pass it a Drush alias, and it will execute against whatever alias you provide. All of these commands are completely configurable in Aquifer.json, so if you need to add a command or remove one, you can totally do that. It's just a list of commands in the JSON file. So the extensions that I was mentioning earlier, Aquifer ships with an extension system that lets you add extra tools to your project on a project-by-project basis. So there's a couple extensions that we've created that are really useful and that we use a lot. Aquifer Git, which allows you to take a Git repository, build a Drupal site, and then commit it to that repository. So let's say you're using Aquifer to build something you're running on Pantheon. Well, Pantheon can't run Aquifer on their servers, so you can run Aquifer Git against the Pantheon. Against the Pantheon code base, their Git repository, and it will commit it and push it up, and you'll be good to go. And Aquifer Coder, which scans the code base for Drupal coding standards violations, pretty simple. And Aquifer Run, which allows you to define and run arbitrary command sets, kind of like refresh. Like if you wanted to add an installation command or a deployment command, you could do that. You can run any set of commands with Aquifer Run against any environments. So those are cool extensions. How do we actually get them on our machines? There's a handy little set of commands here. Aquifer extension-add. Aquifer Coder, for example, will install Aquifer Coder, and it will add a command to Aquifer while Aquifer is running within your project. And you can execute, I think it's PHP lint, and it will go ahead and run all the linters and the coding standards sniffers. And to uninstall an extension, you can just run Aquifer extension remove, Aquifer-coder. And it will go ahead and take that extension out of your project and remove it from your Aquifer JSON file. Aquifer extensions-load, which will load your extensions. Let's say that somebody else working on your project has added an extension. Well, you probably haven't downloaded it on your local machine. So let's say that Chris and I are working on a project, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to install Aquifer Coder. And then Chris checks out my project, and he's like, I don't have Aquifer Coder, Aquifer's going to complain. So he can run Aquifer extensions load, and it will actually go and download those dependencies locally. That's just, we don't want to assume that A, you have an internet connection, and B, you actually want to download the extensions. So it's just a way for users to say explicitly, okay, yes, I do want to install these things that another user has installed. I want those on my machine. And if you want to get a list of your extensions, you can just run Aquifer extensions, and it will spit them all out for you. Extensions can also be installed from your local machines. So in this example, I was installing Aquifer Coder, which is on NPM, NPM's registry. So it'll go ahead and grab that from GitHub. But if you want to install an extension that you're writing or working on, or you want to install a custom one that you have pushed up to your Git repository, but you don't want to publish it to NPM, you can use the -s or -- source flag. And that'll take a full path to a folder that contains an NPM module that is an Aquifer extension, or a Git repository like URL. Any of that will work. This is what the extensions segment of the Aquifer JSON file looks like. Aquifer Drush, Aquifer Coder, Aquifer Git, and you can configure those things to behave in different ways. So, for instance, the Aquifer Coder extension allows you to pass in an ESLint ignore file, and I've passed in a path to an ESLint ignore file, and so it's going to use that now. And so the sort of philosophy around writing extensions for Aquifer is that you'll create tools that can be completely configured. Every single behavior of that extension should be configurable, but it should have very sensible defaults. So you shouldn't need to munge around with it and like play around with it and tweak it to make it work. It should work by default. But if you need to change a behavior, you should be able to do that, and there should be a very clear path for doing it.
So when you say work by default, does this get generated automatically when you do the download?
Yes, so these things get generated automatically. For example, this in Aquifer Git, these properties don't get generated automatically. These are things that you want to override and set. And Aquifer Git is special because it can't have a default repository for you to push to. That just wouldn't work.
Does it put an empty remote in there and you just fill it in, or does
I don't think it actually even does that. It just, the extension actually has really good documentation for doing this, and that's sort of a very important part of the extension publication process. If you publish an extension, nobody's going to use it if you don't document explicitly all the different things that you can do to change the behavior of that extension. So yeah, I guess we could have it scaffold these properties out, but it would be hard to create an API that allowed you to choose to create an empty property or not, based off of how important the property was. That would be kind of hard to create, so we just document it. Like I was saying, we require that all Aquifer extensions be documented clearly. This documentation is available on GitHub or NPM pages if they're published to NPM. So if you have questions, you want to know how to configure it, there's a clear path for doing that. Look up the extensions repository, and it should be right there. On the subject of configuration, everything in Aquifer is configurable. Like I said, not only in extensions, in Aquifer itself, it wants to, everything should be configurable. It wants to have a high level of configurability, but as we all learned in software projects like Android early on, if you provide high configurability and really low, or nonsensical or really no defaults, then the project just becomes a nightmare. So we want to provide really good defaults. Everything is configurable, though. If you want to change the way an extension behaves, if you want to change where you store different assets in your code base, right? If you want to store your themes in /views or store your modules in /ASDF, you can do that. All you need to do is change it in the Aquifer JSON, and it will work. No big deal. Refresh commands is another example of something that you can actually change. And so the Aquifer JSON file allows you to customize basically anything that you want, any behavior you want to change. You can make it different and specific to your project. The other thing is, oftentimes when we develop things, we need to override certain pieces of configuration or provide pieces of configuration just for our local machines, right? Because there might be key files that we want to link to that allow us to access a machine, or There might be steps to the rebuild process that we want to include. So Aquifer respects an aquifer.local.json file. And if you provide that, it will override the values in aquifer.json with the values from the aquifer.local.json file. So let's say that I have, for example, I want to add a refresh command to change the password of my Drupal site because I download the database from some external live server and I don't know the password. So I just run user update password. I can add that command to the refresh commands only for my local machine. This shouldn't happen on deploy. And Aquifer will respect that, and when you run Aquifer refresh, it will pull that in. Another example is you can turn extensions off. Sometimes extensions have really strange problems. One of the extensions that we work with at Aquifer Git has this weird problem on the latest version of OS X that sometimes causes problems. So if it's causing you a problem, you can just turn it off locally. Somebody else can do the deployments for you. You can just set extensions to false. They won't load. And you can also add like local configuration. So let's say that you define an environment or something. You can define a local environment that you don't want to publish to everybody else's machines. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't exist on their machines. So the aquifer.local.json file is a place for you to really customize Aquifer, not on a project-by-project basis, but on a local environment basis. The aquifer.local.json file is ignored by Git, so it's not going to be committed into your repository. If you put a bunch of key files and weird stuff in there, it'll never get up there unless you modify the git ignore file. So it's just a good place to play around with changing behaviors. So that's pretty much all that Aquifer is right now. It's a really...
That's all it is? All right.
Yeah, so it's a tool that allows you to change the way that you approach building Drupal sites from just modifying built, compiled, like ready to run Drupal site root to actually maintaining a collection of custom codes and then constructing an executable site root from those assets. It's been really useful to us. We've had it on several large projects, and it's enabled us to speed up certain parts of our development cycle. And while I don't have any numbers behind that, and it'd be hard to get numbers behind it, it has been very, very helpful for us, and at least on the project that I've used it on. I think one of the projects that I recently worked on, we had a very, very tight deadline, and we were doing a lot of stuff. We had a large team pushing a lot of changes, and we didn't have any regressions at all. We might have had one or two that I don't remember, but there was a very low level of regressions given the circumstances and given the the timeline and everything. And I think that's basically thanks to the the process that this build system puts in place. Right, we're going to take these assets, construct a site root, revert the database against the state that the code base has. If it doesn't work, if you don't have the things that you're trying to get working defined in the code base, well, it's just not going to be in the database. So it's a lot more declarative of those pieces of configuration. It requires you to be more careful to featureize all of your things and make sure that all your configuration is explicitly defined in your code base. So that was really helpful for us. So we're pretty dedicated to maintaining it and continuing to work on it. We have a couple of things in the works right now. We have an environments API, which actually is mostly done. A couple of code review comments on it, but you can actually define environments in Aquifer Core, and then a run API, which will be able to define and run series of commands against any environment that you specify. So right now we have the refresh command, right? Really what that ought to be is just a collection of commands that can be passed to an API. So you could define any commands that you want and execute them against any environment that is specified. The other thing that we want to provide is Drupal 8 support. It's not really that hard to bring. I've got a kind of a beta, really hacky version of it working. It'll take a little bit of time to get cooking, but we want to actually get that running up and running pretty quick. We want to localize Aquifer dependencies. So right now it'll use your system version of Drush and Composer, etc. But we want to make sure that Aquifer, when you install it, goes and grabs its own version of those things so that it doesn't have to rely on the fact that you have the right versions of the right things installed. The other thing that we're working on is 100% unit and functional testing. We want to be able to run the script and make sure that everything in Aquifer works as it should. We want to run that script on different environments, different operating systems, and make sure that it behaves as expected to make sure that when other people use it, it works for them. And then we want to have 100% feature documentation. We're close to that, I would say, but there are still a couple things that I've even mentioned in this presentation that don't have official wiki pages. So those are the things that we were working on. Here are some resources. Aquifer.io is a website that describes what Aquifer is and links to a lot of different things like docs.aquifer.io, which is our wiki. We also have the npm module, which is on npmjs.com. Not much documentation there that isn't in the docs.aquifer.io file, but if you are looking for where it's being downloaded from, that's where. And then we have a Twitter account, Aquifer_io. So if you're trying to use Aquifer and it's not working, you can get some tweets going, and we'll see if we can help you out. I just want to give it a special shout out to some of the people that have worked on this project: Jeff Tomlinson, John Peck, Luke Harrington, Matt Grill, myself, and Peter Sieg. They are excellent human beings that have done a lot to make this project work, and it's thanks to their effort and determination to make this thing a usable piece of software that makes it a usable piece of software. So cheers to those guys. Does anybody have questions?
I was a little late to the maybe this question's been asked before. How does this, what does this do that Drupal console can?
Drupal console, as far as I know, addresses a lot of different problems, but it's not actually a build system. It doesn't help you scaffold a site route or define assets and then create an executable Drupal site route from a collection of assets and then download dependencies and all that. It's a very different tool if I understand what it does completely. So,
First of all, thank you for creating this. This is awesome.
Very cool.
Very good talk.
thanks.
And how about you show us how easy it is to create a project?
Well, that's coming next. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we answer any preliminary questions. Yeah.
So like for the refresh command, right now that assumes that you have an installed Drupal site in the build folder, but the environments API will change. Like when you're trying to run like a Drush command, where is it looking for like the installed Drupal instead of like the build Drupal?
Well, right now you can pass an alias. You can pass an alias to the refresh command. So -a,
okay.
And then the alias. Make sure you include the @ sign. That was a question for me. But when the environments API and the run API are merged into core, which they're very close, you will be able to define environments and then execute any collections of commands against those environments. There's a couple things that we're having to think through because that is actually kind of a hard thing to write, just because there are lots of different systems of different types that have things at different paths, and so we have to make sure that we think about that really carefully before we just have people start using it. But the hope is to just be able to take refresh commands, installation commands, deployment commands, and just execute any series of arbitrary commands against any environment. And there will be two types of environments. There will be Aquifer projects, and there will be Drupal site routes. So you can, I'll show you in a minute what we've got going. But yeah, it's rough. There's a lot of things to like take into consideration. A lot of different possibilities that you have to sort of sort through. So it's probably one of the more complicated pieces that we've been working on.
Have you applied to any pre-existing projects, or are you pretty much exclusively using it sort of building new?
We're, as far as I know, we haven't applied it to any pre-existing projects. There was some talk about making a script that could find all of the dependencies and backport it into an Aquifer project. Excuse me. We haven't had time to write that, but if you want to write an extension for it, that'd be pretty easy to do. Any other questions? Cool. Well, let's take a look since we have some time.
Patrick, this is the one that you wrote while waiting for an airplane at the airport.
Yes. Well, I started it. A lot of people have worked on it, so that's the one that I was getting into. All right. We have 4 viewers on Hangouts. Hey, everybody. Let's see who we have. Actually, it's not showing me. Oh, well. I'm going to share my whole screen and show everybody a little bit about how Aquifer works in a command line. And I'll actually go ahead and show you this too. So aquifer.io, this is the Aquifer website. So if we go ahead and take a look at the GitHub repository, there's a 1.0.0 branch, which actually has some really pretty dope like ES6 JavaScript with some nice like, it's all promises based. You can run any given like pieces of the API synchronously or asynchronously at any given time. So I'm really excited about this. It's super new JavaScripty, I guess, ES 2015. But this is like this is the version that I'm going to be running while I show it to you. So you'll get to see a couple up and coming features. Yay for JavaScript's new features. So let's take a look. First, I'm going to make the size of my terminal a little bit smaller. Go to my desktop. Okay, so Aquifer is a command line interface, and here it is. I'm not in an Aquifer project right now. I'm just in my desktop. So let's go ahead and create an Aquifer project. Patrick's website. Woo. So it says it created it successfully. And I can see that there's a directory in my desktop called Patrick's website. So I'm going to go into that directory and see what we have. Oh, that's all the stuff that I expect, so that's cool. If you want to see an Aquifer JSON file in its entirety, here it is. Here's the path segment that lets you describe where everything is. So if I wanted to change this to here, I could do that. Here's the refresh commands. So that's about all there is to the Aquifer JSON file. Now if I run Aquifer within this directory, you'll see that I get a lot more commands, which create, build, there's a refresh, extension add, extension remove, and extension load. And there's a couple new commands that aren't merged into the actual version of the project yet. Environments, environment remove, environment add, and ping, which allows you to make sure you can actually get access to an environment that you've already defined. So let's just see what we can do here. Aquifer build. Run that. That's going to go ahead and create a site root based off of all the things that we've described and said that we want. So okay, it said it finished. So we can go into the build directory. See, there's a Drupal site root. Go to sites, all modules. We see that we have features and custom, which are symlinks to relative symlinks. That was hard. To the modules, custom and modules features folders in the project root. And we have the themes folder in here with custom. Again, that's a symlink. So it does all the things that it's supposed to do. Contrib, if we go to the contrib directory, we'll see that all the modules we told it to download have been added to the project, so that's cool. And that's what the Aquifer build command does. Right, cool. And I can also run Aquifer build dash, I think it is like. Oh, I'm sorry. That's actually something I should talk about. So the Drupal.make.yaml file is the file that you can describe all of your dependencies in, basically.
So you basically have pre-built.
Yes, we have a default one that has a lot of the things that we really commonly use. We probably need to pare this down a little bit because there's some things that don't make sense in here anymore. I don't know if panels, for instance, should be in here by default, but what's up?
So Aquifer created this file.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when you run Aquifer create, it scaffolds out all of these things which work by default. So I didn't really modify any of this. I just ran Aquifer build and it worked. That's the whole idea around Aquifer. it just works out of the box. And if you want to change this behavior, modify this file. Another example, actually, I'll show you that. So
Say you wanted to change the default behavior going forward, would you fork Aquifer, or would you, like, say I have a different set of modules that I typically install on a new site. How would you approach that?
that's an interesting question. I think that you'll probably just copy it over, maintain your own like default YAML file or whatever. We probably should provide a way to default that kind of thing. That's kind of a hard problem to solve.
You could probably just rename that to example.drupal.make.yaml in the repo.
Mm-hmm.
And then people have to, if they want to use the example, like when you do the create.
Yeah, I think at that point, I would just want it to be a lot. I want it to still work. I would want Aquifer build to work the minute that you create a project, but I would want maybe pare it down a lot so that it doesn't contain a lot of the things that it does, and you can just basically paste in the things that you want. The other thing that
you could make it still work, but comment out the modules that you like. You could have some default modules in there that are commented out or something.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we could probably take a look at that. One of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is that there's a flag for the create command that does a little bit of what you're talking about. So let's say that I wanted to scaffold my project based off of a set of defaults. So I'll take this Aquifer.json file and I'll put it in my thing.json, right? So I have that JSON file and I want to modify it. Let's say that I want to call it, I want the settings directory to be, I want the build directory to be mackerel. I want the themes directory, the contrib directory to be, or the custom directory to be cucumbers. I can actually pass that modified file to Aquifer create. So Aquifer create -c my thing.json pizza. And I'll go ahead and create pizza. And as you can see, it copied that file over. And now I have pizza and mackerel. And if I look in the themes directory, I'll see cucumbers is my custom theme thing. So you can scaffold it really customizably, but there's no way for you to add like, oh, hey, load this gitignore, load this Drupal make file by default.
So this might get a little crazy, but could you have it built into two separate directories with different options? Like,
What are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
Well, so you have the same base files, right? But maybe you have a different theme between two different websites, but all the modules and everything else are the same. You have two build directories. You could have, client 1, client 2, whatever. But you have different Drush make files or whatever with all your different options.
I think at that point you would create a distribution.
Well, Aquifer create, you could do two different Aquifers, right? Which is how you're supposed to do it now. Like Aquifer create project 1, Aquifer create project 2.
So you would take a JSON file and then add that to two different Aquifer JSON projects. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so the idea right now is different projects are supposed to be separated,
Mhm.
and then you customize each one of them.
Yeah, because they're different projects.
So I think, does that also kind of answer the question you're asking about just copying like the Drush makeover to your new project?
Maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. You could just maintain your own version of that and adjust somewhere or something, and then when you would just copy it over. It wouldn't be too hard to do. And in my mind, that's might not be worth automating. I don't know. There's always there's a balance between automating everything and making everything work really well. So if you want to automate something like that, if you want to build a system where you can provide default source files, it needs to work well and it needs to be easy to use. So I'll think about that. We might be able to we might be able to build something for that to make that easy. Maybe we can have like a step of questions that it asks you, and you can just be like use default or whatever.
It was more of a curiosity question than anything else.
If you do something like you did with that local machine file, you just have a set of instructions that override the defaults.
Well, that would have to, you would have to modify the source, and Aquifer.json doesn't describe the source files such that the source files are things that are copied by default from Aquifer to the new project. It just defines the files that are in the actual project. So it doesn't define where they're coming from Aquifer. It just defines where they are in relationship to the project. So that would be kind of that'd be a hard thing to munge in there. What's up?
So Aquifer create copies from a directory within Aquifer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could you put a new argument in the Aquifer create command to say copy it from my other directory?
It'd be difficult for that to work well and be well documented and to be an easy tool to use. Because you'd have to know all the correct file names to add. You'd have to know a lot of information about what that folder should contain and how it should be structured for it to work correctly. So it'd be kind of frustrating.
So the idea would be Aquifer create the very first time, make all your custom changes, and then Aquifer create from that previously created one with all your custom stuff.
Like Aquifer fork or something?
Yeah, like kind of like Aquifer.
Yeah, that would be possible. You could definitely do that. I mean, you could also do just cp-r as well. So again, it's always a balance between like writing everything into a script and then deciding what you want to do really, really well, and doing those things. So that's a good idea, though. I think I'll think about this. There might be a way for us to help out with that. What's up?
I have a question from the chat room on the video thing.
Oh, cool.
How does it differ from Capistrano? Like, does it do deploys over SSH or rsync or something like that?
Okay, so Capistrano is a deployment system.
Yeah.
It works really well for Ruby projects. It does not try to compete with Capistrano at all. You could add a Capistrano extension if you wanted to. It doesn't really it doesn't try to compete with that. I'm sure with Capistrano you could create a build like. Yeah, you could actually like do all the things you do in Aquifer and Capistrano, but I think that would be a little bit awkward to work with in a non-deployment environment. So if you're trying to just work with the code base, do some linting, do some testing, I think Capistrano probably wouldn't work quite as well for that.
Is Capistrano only a deploy tool or also a build?
It's primarily a deploy tool.
Yeah,
So Aquifer does your build. Capistrano, you could do your deploy.
totally. Or
And
Jenkins.
They don't really crossover
I
necessarily.
don't think
that
they
much.
should. I think you could accomplish those things with Capistrano, but I don't think that would be necessarily a great idea. I'm not super hyper familiar with Capistrano, so I could be pulling things out of thin air, but I think that it's probably best to just stick with using Capistrano as a deployment tool. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. We might be able to write an extension for it, and maybe there's some overlap that we could leverage. Any other questions floating around? Anybody?
So how much configuration does this do? Like, if I wanted to test this on my local machine,
Mhm.
would I have to like create a Drupal VM instance just so I can get everything working, so I can bring it up in a browser and all that?
So
How far does this go to
This-
accomplishing that?
this goes to creating a Drupal site root, but Aquifer is a sort of a toolbox, and with the extension system, you can add new tools to that box. So if you wanted to create a Drupal VM extension, which is something that I think John Peck is working on currently, if you wanted to create that as an extension, so you could just install it and be ready to go with Drupal VM, you could do that. It's something that we're working on because we use Drupal VM and we like it. So we're not quite there where you can just run Aquifer Drupal VM magical and have a site running, but I mean, it's not that hard to do. There's just a couple problems to solve. I have confidence in John. So, any other questions? No? Cool. All right. Just real quick, if you want to see some of the things that are coming up, there's a new extensions API. So, I'm sorry, not extensions, environments API. So if I run Aquifer and this is not in core yet, so when you install it, you won't have this, but it's up and coming. I can define environments. So Aquifer environments -add. Wait. m-add. It'll ask me a series of questions. What is the host? 192.168.99.99. And then on what port will the SSH connect to it? 22. Say it's a Vagrant machine. Then Vagrant /o.d insecure private key. And our www test build is the Drupal root, and then var www test is the Aquifer root. Now, if you look in your Aquifer JSON file, you'll see that there is a new environment, which is the one I just described. And with the Run API, which I started working on, you'll be able to define commands like the refresh commands, and then execute those against environments. So everything will have a --n flag. As you can see, if I do Aquifer --help, the entire CLI has a --n flag in the new updates. So you'll be able to specify an environment that you want to propagate the commands you're running to or run them against. So that's a new and upcoming thing. It should be fun. Any other questions or thoughts or delios?
Purely a CLI tool. It's not no GUI interface.
There is no GUI interface for it, and if you'd like to write a GUI interface for it, it wouldn't be too hard.
Am I going to be sitting at an airport anytime soon?
I don't like GUIs stereotypically. Not really. I just don't use them a whole lot, so I'm pretty comfortable using Aquifer, the CLI. But if a lot of people want a GUI, then I'll work on a GUI. It'd be cool.
Where's the name come from?
So,
Where does the name come from?
well, aquifers are bodies of water that live under the ground, essentially, so like the Edwards Aquifer, right? Supplies South Austin with water, and so Drupal is a drop, and so you want to pump drops out of an aquifer, and so it's kind of like a scaffolding building tool.
They produce very clean water.
Stereotypically, yes, they do.
They start out doing that. It depends on what.
Yeah. If you're like, some,
So you produce a clean website.
yeah, hopefully.
Oh,
I had a problem typing ACQ because I'm thinking of Aquia.
Yeah.
The company. So it's kind of a mind twister.
Yeah, there was some discussion around changing its name to something else, but we couldn't find a really good alternative, so we just stuck with Aquifer.
Aquifer's really.
So I think
buy a domain and have to redirect ACQ. Direction A.
that's, yeah, I might actually do that. We'll see. Yeah, maybe we'll add a symlink for the command too. That's maybe we don't want to encourage that pattern though. I don't know. Either way,
Misspellings.
yeah.
Fuzzy.
Well, if that's all the question, I have a couple announcements to go through for the ADUG. First off, from now on, we'll be meeting here at the Capitol Factory. Might not always be in this room, but it will be in this building. Parking is easily available. See the parking downtown page that Brandon made for us. It's on meetup.com. You can also look up the parking documentation that Capitol Factory has provided, and they will give you information on where you can park and how you can park for cheap.
Pretty.
I parked in a garage somewhere. I don't know. I am slightly concerned about finding my car again after I leave.
You know that when you walk in here, you can get a $5 ticket from the event.
Yeah, I just
Technician
Oh, I didn't put that.
specialist.
yes. They'll validate your parking so you can actually like park in here for $5. So that's probably the easiest option.
Yeah, the one across the street, the Alamo Draft House parking is also fine.
I think that's where I parked. Thank you. Thank
It
you.
looks kind of like a murder scene, but.
Yeah, that's why I'm concerned. I'm
Oh,
not
that's
sure.
right, the TV. Oh, yeah. Oh, my.
Not sure that my car's actually going to be there, but we'll hope. And then, so secondly, or thirdly, actually, next month, March 2016, there's not going to be an ADUG meeting because South by Southwest is a big deal, and you probably won't even be able to like get downtown, much less come to this meeting, which I think we don't even have a room for because South by Southwest. So alternatively, we are having a Drupal drop-in hosted by Four Kitchens and Aquia, I think. Does Maisie have anything in there? No? Okay. I don't want to leave anybody out. So yeah, you should come to that. It's at Maggie Mays from 1200 to 1500 on March the 12th. That's 12 o'clock p.m. to 3 o'clock p.m.
12 to 3.
Yes.
Eventbrite for it.
Yes.
And you don't need a South by ticket. You show up.
I think you can just show up. Yeah, you have to RSVP. There's an Eventbrite, and it is on 4Kitchen's Twitter at least. I think it's on a number of other companies' Twitter accounts.
It'll
So
also be on the Slack channel for people who are not added yet.
yes, that's another thing. If anybody here is not on the Slack channel, come talk to me or Chris or somebody else, and we'll go get you added. The Austin Drupal user group, the ADUG group.
ADUG, that's like,
We have our own house now.
They have times in Super Bowl. We must have some cash.
Yes.
That's it.
Mhm. Cool. Well, that's about all that I've got. So thank you so much for coming and hanging out, and cheers. And hopefully you'll use Aquifer. And yeah, rock on, everybody.
Very cool tool. Thank you. Very cool.
Yeah, cheers. So people on the Hangouts, thanks for joining us. I'm gonna discontinue this broadcast in a few moments, but your presence was, although not very obvious, very greatly appreciated. Cheers, rock on, and have a good night. Bye.